Matt, thank you very much for agreeing to an interview for my book, A Restored Earth, 10 Paths to a Hopeful Future. How are you?
Good, I'm very well.
Good. I wanted to start by asking you for your vision for a restored Earth in terms of the marine environment, knowing about your work at Pew on marine protected areas and marine governance.
Sure, well, let me just start with exactly who I am. So I'm Matt Rand. I'm the director of the Pew Bertarelli Ocean Legacy Project, which is a project that has a vision of 15 great marine reserves or marine parks globally established by 2022.
Amazing. And how's the campaign going, and how optimistic are you that you will fulfill this admirable vision?
I think the campaign is going quite well. We originally established our efforts around 2006 when Papahanaumokuakea was first formed. That is a marine reserve in the northwest Hawaiian Islands that was originally established by President Bush at the time. We worked in Hawaii and Washington, D.C. to help support that effort. And when Papahanaumokuakea was first formed, it changed the paradigm of what was possible in the space of marine reserves. Previously, marine reserves were on the average of just a few square kilometers in size. And when Papahanaumokuakea was formed, it was 365,000 square kilometers in size. So it totally changed the paradigm of what was possible to do in the ocean. And we built the program really in 2006 following that model. And since that time, we've been successful in securing or fully establishing 9 marine reserves globally, to the tune of really a pretty massive area, 6.2 million square kilometers in size. So something like the equivalent of 2/3 the size of the United States of the ocean is now protected. So I think things are going well. Certainly a lot more is needed, but I think we've started to make some great strides.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you. And what form does the marine protected area take on the water, as it were? Is this an area where there is some access to fishing for local communities? How is it enforced, and what sort of arrangements are made on the water, as opposed to on the ground, as it were?
Sure. So, what we do is we follow the science, and there's a key paper, that really lays out what needs to happen for the world's oceans when it comes to marine reserves. That paper was in Science publication about 2 years ago now, maybe a little bit more, which looked at marine reserves globally, over 1,000 marine reserves globally, and looked at where those marine reserves were functioning and actually helping to ensure or recover biodiversity. And the paper said that there are really 5 key elements to successful marine reserves. That they're large, and their definition of large was 100,000 square kilometers in size or more. That they're fully protected or highly protected. That they are isolated. They are well enforced, and that they are old. And so that's what we attempt to follow. We attempt to follow the science. You can't always follow the science in establishing marine reserves. For instance, establishing a marine reserve means that it's not old. So you have to wait time out on that one. But really, that is our focus. We try to follow those criteria because that is what the science tells us is needed for successful marine reserves that protect and restore biodiversity. We are often working with local communities, not always, but oftentimes. And when we're working with local communities, we're trying to devise strategies that work for the local community and ensure their culture and tradition, while balancing the protection of the marine environment and ocean conservation. So for instance, for Easter Island, we've been working for 5 years now with the Rapa Nui to come up with a plan that enables and protects their cultural and traditional fishing practices while protecting the marine environment around the island. So they have actually come up with a proposal that we've given technical guidance to and support for a marine reserve that starts loosely at around 25 to 50 miles, and then from there it goes out to the end of the exclusive economic zone as a fully protected area. The inner area would be for traditional and cultural fishing practices. So we try to balance and work with local communities to ensure that their interests are protected, that their environment is protected, because if they lose their environment, it becomes too degraded, they'll lose their culture and tradition with the loss of that environment. So both are interconnected and important. When it comes to how these things are enforced, there's no one right answer for any particular marine reserve. Each one is different. So for the United States purposes, the U.S. military, through the Coast Guard and the Navy, their ability to use satellites and other technologies, are in charge of enforcing both marine reserves, but also U.S. domain. That is the mandate of the United States. And largely these marine reserves actually oftentimes follow the exclusive economic zone, the limit of a country's domain, and therefore the lines are the same lines, so that can help with the enforcement side of it. Other countries, like Palau, need additional assistance. We've worked with Catapult Applications, which is a UK system looking at the space side of Catapult and satellite monitoring. So we have developed a system with Catapult to actually monitor marine reserves for illegal activity, monitor and hopefully get at enforcement through satellite monitoring. So that's a new system. We've been using that actually over Pitcairn Island for over a year now, working with the UK government to provide data, information, satellite imagery, so that they can use it as a monitoring and enforcement tool. So there's no one size fits all, but I think the use of new technology is a huge development when it comes to the possibility of creating large marine reserves out in the open ocean or out in the kind of blue ocean. It enables the possibility because of this new technology.
Thank you, that's wonderful. Matt, could you remind me what percentage of the world's marine area is currently protected, and what has the international community committed itself to achieving in terms of marine protected areas?
So it's a very good question, because there are shades of protection that one needs to consider when you're looking at the numbers. And trying to quantify kind of global numbers can be a challenging task. Again, if we're looking at what needs to be accomplished through the filter of science, there has been a call by science entities like the World Conservation Congress and the World Parks Congress, led by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which are scientists. And the call has been for 30% of the world's ocean and respective habitats to be highly protected. There's another call that governments have signed up to through the Convention on Biological Diversity, which says 10% of the ocean habitat should be protected. But when you actually look at where we are in respect to those goals, we're quite a ways off. We are, when it comes to highly protected marine reserves, I don't think we have reached 2% yet. We are less than 2%. If you're looking at all marine reserves, and again, the science indicates that not all marine reserves are created equally. you are getting up to more like the 3% number, maybe slightly higher. So there's a long way to go. That said, in the last, the last 5 years, there's been exponential growth. I think, we have had the early adopters in this strategy, and I think there is becoming a more recognized need for these highly protected marine reserves. And I'm optimistic that the projections will continue to exponentially grow.
Thank you. Matt, the book I'm trying to write is avowedly optimistic. There are lots of case studies in it about where things are going well on the environment and sustainable development around the world. And I wondered whether you'd be willing to describe one or two marine protected areas or one or two marine marinescapes, where in your book things are going really well and where potentially what's happening could be replicated and scaled up elsewhere. Are there any examples that spring to mind around the world?
Yeah, what I'm really also interested in and excited about is an interest from local communities, indigenous people, really taking the lead, small island developing states, who have probably the most interest in a healthy ocean. They are fully dependent on a healthy ocean, and therefore I really see an amazing rise in the last, say, decade or so of the small island developing states pushing for ocean conservation of one realm or another, and local communities following as well. So, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, I think is a very exciting place for ocean conservation. You have the whole community engaged in developing a strategy for their ocean ecosystem. And that strategy is being advanced through a government process that will hopefully ultimately create one of the world's largest highly protected marine reserves while ensuring that the Rapa Nui protect their culture and their tradition, and hopefully giving the Rapa Nui more control and say over the resources around their island. So actually engaging them in the management decisions for the marine park. I think it's a great example of a highlight of where things are starting to turn for the better when it comes to conservation in general. Of course, I lose you.
Just a second ago, so carry on, sorry.
So, the other interesting thing, when you think about Easter Island, of course, is that it is known by many by a book called Collapse by Jared Diamond, which the ecosystem collapsed on the island because of deforestation. So the Rapa Nui, according to Jared Diamond, had cut down all their trees so that they could move the stone sculptures, the moai, from where they are mined, they're quarried, down to the coast where they were erected. And once the island was deforested, essentially the whole ecosystem collapsed. And then from there, further collapsed the population of the Rapa Nui themselves. So you had this really interesting dynamic where the Rapa Nui in the past have had this ecosystem collapse and population collapse, and now are changing their history and looking at the future, thinking about the generations to come, and instead of following their path, they're moving in a very inspiring vision for the future, which protects them and protects their environment. So I think it's a great example of where there's a opportunity and hope for the world's oceans. We need to engage with people that really are connected and feel the importance of the ocean and it's happening. And if the environmental NGO community and world leaders, governments can all kind of come together around some of these big ideas and support people that are dependent on a healthy ocean, I think that's where we're going to make our most gains.
Thank you, that's very clear. The UK and its overseas territories, you mentioned earlier. I wondered if you could say a word more about some of those areas and how the push for more marine protected areas is going in that context.
Yeah, the United Kingdom, it's probably not known by most, really has domain of some of the most spectacular ocean ecosystems on the planet. In part because these ecosystems have been so isolated that they have not been significantly degraded. I say significantly, really, unfortunately, it's hard to say that any ecosystem on the planet has not been degraded. We're actually finding plastic particles on the bottom of the ocean in Antarctica, for instance. But that said, back to the point, the UK has some spectacular ocean ecosystems under its domain. Pitcairn, which is one of the largest marine reserves in the world now, has an unbelievably important marine ecosystem in the South Pacific. It has some of the deepest corals on the planet because the water clarity around the islands, amazing endemic species, whales, sharks, all kinds of seabird life and fish. It is a tremendous biological spectacle and treasure for the planet now that it has been protected by the UK government. There are other places like Ascension. Probably the one that is maybe considered the most biologically spectacular on the planet. If we're talking land or sea, more biodiverse and abundant than even the Galapagos is South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. This is a global treasure for ocean conservation. Whales congregate, blue whales, sperm whales, humpback. You've got one of the most incredible populations of seabirds left on the planet are found in South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands. You have some of the highest densities of penguins left on the planet. Just an amazing ocean ecosystem, kind of like the Serengeti or Galapagos combined around this ecosystem. And really, it is still largely intact. There is krill fishing going on in the area, which, again, this fishery is a fishery that is generally used for supplements or to be ground up and fed to other fish in aquaculture. So it's not a life-sustaining fishery. This is a fishery for kind of industrial purposes, which does butt up against the wildlife. So it's something that I think we seriously need to take a hard look at, because you've got really just one of the most spectacular places on the planet for life, and an opportunity, I think, to protect this area. So that is one that I think, when you look at the world's oceans in general, should probably have two asterisks on for the importance to the biodiversity of the ocean and the planet. But there are others. Tristan da Cunha is an important one. St. Helena. Of course, you have other areas that are more developed, like Bermuda. They're all opportunities, and I'm very encouraged to see the UK government take such a strong stance and recognition of these biological treasures through the Blue Belt Commitment. The government committed to protect a large portion of this domain, and we are standing by and working with the government to hopefully see that vision into fruition.
Wonderful. Very pleased to hear that. Closer to home to where you are, I was very struck by how much President Obama, particularly towards the end of his second term, but perhaps throughout, committed himself, as did the government of Canada, to action on the ocean and marine protected areas and so on. And I wanted to ask what your view was in terms of the ocean adjoining the US and Canada, and how the cause is going closer to where you are.
Well, President Obama, I think stepped up the ocean conservation game probably more than any other person in recent history. There has been a great track record that has been set, really, again, starting in 2006 by President Bush. I think President Obama was starting to look at ocean conservation not through just the lens of protection of biodiversity because of extraction purposes. I think he was starting to look through the lens of climate change. I think he had recognized that these ecosystems are not only important to protect from the biodiversity standpoint, but because of our warming planet and acidification, loss of coral globally, I think he established more ocean, highly protected marine reserves than any other person in history. I think because he was looking at this issue through the lens of climate change and the importance of climate change. I think there were all the other factors were there too, of course, the protection of biodiversity. But my sense is, from all the reading I've done and interviews that I've done to hear about the president's rationale, he was thinking about all these issues. And I think for the first time, a global leader was thinking about ocean conservation through the lens of climate change. So I'm very encouraged that we are starting to think about the protection of these important biological places actually could be a place of resilience when we're thinking about our changing planet and the changing ocean dynamics with warming, acidification, coral bleaching, and the rest. But also the potential importance for the planet in general. I think we're still early days in understanding how the ocean and how a healthy ocean will impact the planet when it comes to climate change. But I think it's clear that the ocean is the largest carbon sink. That a healthy ocean is a more resilient ocean to the effects of climate change. We're starting to understand how healthy ecosystems will keep our planet healthy more generally. So we're getting there, and President Obama's efforts, I think, are a step in the right direction toward a healthy environment and planet.
Great, thank you, and let's hope that they very much continue in that direction. I wondered, Matt, how your focus here on marine protected areas relates to and is directly sort of supported by the other work that Pew's involved in, that Tony kindly set out to me in an interview a fortnight or so ago around illegal fishing and around governance of the ocean more broadly. Presumably this is all part of a big integrated view and strategy for the ocean, which goes beyond marine protected areas to encompass all of those other dimensions of what you're working on.
Yeah, that's right. Pew has been engaged in ocean conservation for probably more than 30 years now. First as a philanthropic organization, and then as we transitioned from a philanthropic organization into an NGO, doing the running programs ourselves. We did a first look, and really our focus initially was on U.S. oceans, and had been engaged in our domestic law that governs our oceans and our fisheries, which is the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Really, almost from the beginning of that law. We then worked on a commission called the Pew Ocean Commission, which was a bipartisan look at what was needed for continued healthy domestic ocean. And it looked at everything from how to do fisheries management better to non-point source pollution and runoff to shipping and marine reserves. So it really was a holistic look at what would be needed. We have started building a program around that time that focused on domestic oceans, but about, I guess it's a decade or so ago now, started to transition into a global ocean strategy. One of the key things that we did in developing the strategy was to commission another look at the oceans, which was the Global Ocean Commission. So we helped set up and supported the Global Ocean Commission, which made recommendations about how, as a global society, we should be thinking about what we need to do to preserve ecosystems in the ocean, while also preserving the ability for local populations to catch sustainable fish. So Pew has really been engaged in just about every element when it comes to ocean conservation, but really with a focus on sustainable, scientific-based fishing and protection of key ecosystems and species. That's really where our focus has been, along with tackling the problem of illegal and unregulated and unreported fishing. So we have a program, for instance, focused on the EU Common Fisheries Policy, which really is, I think, in my mind, a model off of the U.S. Fisheries system, really focused on establishing credible scientific catch limits or limits for the amount of fish that can be caught sustainably, and then ensuring that those scientific limits are set well and monitored and enforced.
Very, very interesting. Well, it's wonderful to hear you, Matt, talking about all of this, and I very much want to write about marine protected areas in my book, so I will draw on what you've said. I'm also writing about the Seychelles and what's being done there. I don't know if you follow the Seychelles.
Yep.
And what that very interesting project that's been set up with a number of agencies to protect and conserve and sustainably exploit the marine area adjoining the Seychelles. But I suppose my last question really is, in light of all that you know and in light of all that you're doing and all the actions being taken, do you think that we're winning? Do you have grounds for hope? Do we need to dramatically step up what we're doing? I'd like to sort of get your personal feeling on, how optimistic we ought to be about all of this.
Well, I am somebody who always has an optimistic look and hope. I am also somebody who's grounded in the facts and the science. I will say that the facts and the science indicate that we are not winning. We are losing, and we're losing rapidly. We are projected to lose coral reefs. We are projected to lose the sustainability or viability of many fish species. Seabirds, which are completely interconnected with the ocean ecosystem, are declining at an alarming rate. Penguins declining. So the science and the data indicate that we are losing at an extremely alarming rate. I have hope. I think we're starting to turn the corner, and we're starting to get world leaders paying attention to this problem in a way that we have never seen before. You can look at just the establishment of marine reserves, which I think is it's a signal, it's a key, it's a sentinel to what is needed for the ocean. It's the ultimate thing that can be done for ocean conservation. And we're seeing world leaders step up on global stages like the United Nations General Assembly, the World Ocean Conference, the International Marine Protected Area Congress, stepping up on those stages and committing vast areas of the ocean as highly protected marine reserves. That we have never seen in the past, and we're talking about really a decade and an amazing turn to see how our oceans are now become an important political dynamic, and having world leaders recognize and actually make hard choices. These are not easy things to do. These are very often tied up in major political battles domestically, sometimes global geopolitical dynamics, and they are stepping up on stage and making brave decisions to protect ocean ecosystems. And my belief is that when these leaders are doing these really kind of bold initiatives for the ocean, whether it be these marine reserves or efforts to tackle illegal fishing, or a new law to set sustainable fishing efforts, those are key moments and gaining recognition to the planet, to the world leaders, to citizens, that we need to start to change our course when it comes to the ocean. So I have hope that we will get there, and we have to be dogged at the efforts. We have to, I believe, stay grounded in the science, stay apolitical, and generate support from unconventional allies, and work very closely with local populations that are fully dependent on healthy ocean ecosystems.
Thank you very much, Matt, and wonderful to hear you talk about all this, and I'm very grateful to you for the interview for the book. I hope the unconventional leadership might manifest itself in multiple ways in the short term. We will see.
Yes, we will. We will be looking for unusual allies.